All right, to our text, John chapter 12. Whoever serves me must follow me, and where I am, my servant also will be. My Father will honor means to value or to esteem, the one who serves me. We talked a little bit a week or so ago about the distinction between choosing the name Christian and being a disciple. We have millions of people who are, quote, Christian, but we don't have that many who are disciples. And this is the very definition of a disciple, the one who serves me. Now my soul is troubled, and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour? No, it was for this very reason I came to this hour. Matthew, Mark, and Luke all give the account of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. John does not. I have no idea why. I mean, he was there, but maybe he thought it had been adequately covered by the other writers, which had written before he got around to writing the book of John. But it had been in publication for a long time before he wrote this. But this is kind of John's Gethsemane moment. Should I try to get out of this? Well, no, I won't get out of this because this is the very reason that I came. Father, glorify, honor, praise, or magnify your name. And a voice came from heaven. I have glorified it and will glorify it again. Third time that we have record of God recognizing in a vocal, audible way Jesus as his son. What are the other two? At his baptism and on the Mount of Transfiguration. Right. So this is the third one. Now is the time for judgment on this world. Now the prince of this world will be driven out. Now, that's kind of a strange comment for Jesus to make. Both of those nows, judgment and Satan being driven out, have the sound of eschatology, right? They have end time sound. But it's not end time, is it? So why would Jesus say, now is the time? Thoughts on that? We got a mic guy right here. Why would he say now?
Well, if you look at Revelation, there's in about chapter 13, you see that basically Satan was barred from being able to go up like he had been, go up into heaven and present accusations. And it talks about the fact that because of he knows now that the time is short, that he's going to intensify his persecution. So about being driven out, if you look back in Job, he was able to go up and accuse Job, but now he can no longer go before God and accuse us because Jesus made that sacrifice. So that's basically what he's talking about here.
Okay.
I don't know if there's anything in it at all, but my mind went immediately to Jesus saying it is finished. And so the time is now. And I could see where this judgment on this world could be referred to the judgment that he finds, that he has found innocent of everything. And so he has delivered the final nail in Satan's coffin because he has now been judged and found innocent, or will be shortly. And so I could see the now representing that it has come to a close. He's finishing it.
Okay. Anybody else? Well, kind of the way I described it is, and this is what you're saying, divine justice through the cross. God demonstrates his justice by dealing with sin decisively. Those who reject Jesus align themselves with this judgment. Those who believe are saved by it. The die is cast, is set in stone, and as you said, Satan is driven out. The cross is victorious. Colossians 2:15 says, and having disarmed the powers and authorities, he made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them by the cross.
You know, that last one in Colossians, we don't really understand the impact that would have had to a member of Roman society, because that's what the Romans did. Every time they had a victory over one of their enemies, they'd bring all of the leaders and anybody of importance, and they would actually just drag them through the city behind the general who had won the victory, who was showing them, it was called a triumph, that whole procession. And it would show our power is so much greater than that. And this is what Paul's saying here. Jesus did the same thing to all of those who oppose, especially those following Satan, and the principalities and powers really symbolizes all of the angels that follow after Satan. And Jesus is now having his triumph procession.
Exactly. Very good. Yeah, I mean, sure, Satan is still alive and well today, but he's already lost. The victory has already been won. It was finished now. Good. And when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all men or all people to myself. He said this to show the kind of death he was going to die. I'm going to go off on a little bit of a side note here. The statement is pretty straightforward. How are we drawn to Jesus? We're drawn by the cross. What is the good news? The good news is the incarnation, the sacrificial death, and the resurrection. That's the good news. We are drawn to Christ because of the cross. Without the cross, there wouldn't have been the resurrection. Without the cross, the incarnation would have had no specific meaning. So that's pretty clear. And I don't take any argument at all with that idea of what John is saying here. We are drawn to Christ by the cross. But is it possible that maybe Jesus had something else in his mind when he said this? When we talk about remiss, we're going to go into the idea of remiss here a little bit. There are a little short review on translation and interpretation. There are hundreds of English translations today. They generally fall in three categories, even though there's some crossover within some of them, so it's not cut and dried. We have what's called formal equivalency. This is where a translator, to the very best of his ability, translates word for word from the Greek to the English, or from the Latin to the English, or whatever he's using, but primarily from the Greek. It's called a literal translation, an interlinear translation. The examples of this in particular are the King James Version, which there was an effort to do that there, and there was the American Standard Version. And there are others. I'm just throwing a couple of examples. All translations have a certain element of interpretation and opinion. And even agenda, even the formal equivalency, even the word for word. If you want to see a word for word, you can go to Strong's or Young's lexicon, and you can see here's the Greek word, here's the English word. Now, it doesn't read like English. You're looking at one word at a time. And even then, here's the Greek word, and oh, by the way, here are 3 or 4 possible English words. So even that, there is an element of interpretation and opinion. And then when King James translators, or the ASV, American Standard translators, take that literal and move it into the English, it's not really, it doesn't read well, because you have to rearrange the syntax, put it into the order that we would use it here, get the verb and the noun in the proper order, and the tenses in the proper order. And oh, by the way, you may need to add a word here or there to give the meaning of it. Are you following me? Other translations, the dynamic equivalents, this is a phrase for phrase, thought for thought. They don't worry so much about word for word translation. What is the meaning? What are they trying to say to us? And how can we express that in English? New International Version, New Living Translation are examples of that. Then the most distance away from a literal would be the optimal equivalents, and these are idiomatic. We usually refer to them as paraphrases. They make no effort to preserve the original language. They want to preserve the original intent in modern terminology. Where Jesus might use an idiom that would make no sense to us today, they would use an idiom that would be in the vernacular of people today. And those are things like the voice and the message. Hermeneutics, this is how we apply the text. The describing of the text, describing of the original intent, is called exegesis, where we wrestle word for word and phrase for phrase and thought for thought. How do we apply that to us today? It's what we call hermeneutics. There is a literal interpretation, which most of us grew up with. It takes the text at face value, understanding it according to its plain and obvious meaning within our experience, based on grammar, historical context, and cultural background. So for an example, when we read as a literal interpretation, when we read Genesis 1:1, or we read the first 3 chapters of Genesis, then it is to us a factual statement of God's creation of the physical universe. 6 literal days, Eve literally coming from the side of Adam, everything exactly as it is written. Okay, that's the literal interpretation. A moral interpretation looks for ethical teachings and lessons within the text, applying them to personal and communal behavior. For example, if we looked at the parable of the Good Samaritan, it would be about what are the moral interpretation, what emphasis does it place on how we interact with one another, loving one's neighbor, showing compassion, regardless of our cultural differences. And then there is the allegorical interpretation, which sees deeper symbolic meanings behind the text, often pointing to Christ or spiritual truths. So, for example, Exodus 12, the Passover lamb would be all about how Jesus is the fulfillment of that symbolism. It doesn't even matter whether it happened or not. It's the moral lessons, the applications that we make of it. And then the anagogical interpretation was an eye toward its ultimate heavenly significance, looking at everything eschatologically. How is this going to play out in life after death, focusing on eternal life, the fulfillment of God's promise. For example, Revelation 21, description of how the new heaven and the new earth can be understood, as a vision of the believer's future hope in God's eternal kingdom. All right, so with that little bit of background, in the text that we had a while ago, of being drawn by the cross. In the literal translations, for example, especially, maybe essentially, but especially the King James Version. When the King James Version had to add words to the Greek text for it to read well and make sense, they were so intent on honoring the Greek and honoring the process that they did something to show that they had added a word. What did they do?
Was it parentheses or something?
Italics.
Italics, yeah.
They put it in italics. If you have a King James Version and you go through and you're reading, if you see words in italics, that means those words were not translated from the Greek. We put them in so that you could understand more easily and read more easily and beautifully the English language. They were trying to be honest and sincere in their interpretation, in their translation. All right, all of that to come back to this. And if, and incidentally, the Greek word is not when, it is if. Many of your translations will say when. And that's an interpretation by the translator that says it's not a matter of if, it's going to happen. Jesus knows it's going to happen, we know it's going to happen, so it's not if, it's when. So they changed the word. It's okay, I'm not taking issue with it, I'm just explaining it to you. And if I be lifted up from the earth, will draw all, and if you look at your King James, men is in italics. The Greek doesn't have men in it. I will draw all to myself. He said this to show the kind of death he was going to die. Now, again, I've got no issue with what we were talking about earlier. The cross draws us. It certainly does. But what if he had something else? Remember, Jesus had memorized the Tanakh. He knew the Torah, he knew the Psalms, he knew the writings, he knew the prophets by heart. And everything he says, he's got that in his mind. What if, when Jesus said that, he was thinking about Isaiah 52? There was nothing to attract us to him. It was, and I'm paraphrasing this, it was our weaknesses he carried. He carried them to the cross. It was our sorrows that weighed him down. They were weighed down on the cross. He was pierced for our rebellion. He was crushed for our sins. He was beaten so we could be whole. He was whipped so we could be healed. The Lord has laid on him the sins of us all. Would that work? Now, I don't know what was in Jesus' mind, but it would not surprise me that this was not ringing in the back of his thoughts. Thoughts or comments? Would you like to add anything to that?
Well, I hadn't really thought of it specifically the way you said, but if you go back and just take out the word men or people, and he said, "Will draw all to myself." It really, to me, the way you said it there implies that I'm going to bring not just humanity back to God, but I'm going to bring all of this back to the way it is supposed to be. And not just talking about people, but talking about all of creation.
Very possibly. And when he is speaking his last utterance that we have recorded on the cross, what does he say? It's finished. It's finished. I've drawn it all. All right. The crowd spoke up. We have heard from the law that the Messiah will remain forever. So how can you say the Son of Man must be lifted up? Who is this Son of Man? Well, they knew who the Son of Man was. The Son of Man was the Messiah. That's what he had been called historically. They're asking a legitimate question. And they have the writings of the prophets, and they are looking for a physical Messiah to sit on David's throne to rule over Israel and the world from now on. And they go back to passages like Isaiah 9 and 7. Of the increase of his government and peace there will be no end. He, the Messiah, will reign on the throne of David and over his kingdom to establish and sustain it with justice and righteousness from that time. And how long? And forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will accomplish this. So they ask a good question. You're sitting here talking about you're going to die. How can you be Messiah if you're going to die? How do you answer that? Jesus told them, you're going to have the light just a little while longer. That doesn't sound like a good answer. If I'm asking that question, how are you as a Messiah going to die? And he says, well, you're only going to have the light a little bit longer. I haven't gotten an answer. Walk while you have the light before darkness overtakes you. Whoever walks in the dark does not know where they are going. Believe in the light while you have the light so that you may become children of light. And when he had finished speaking, Jesus left and hid himself from them. How does that answer the question they just asked?
This may sound really stupid. At this point in time, I could hear him saying, I am Messiah in name only. I will be Messiah when it's all finished. I don't know if that makes sense, but he did not fulfill everything until the time when he said it's finished. And so while he came as the Messiah, he came to do everything that until he could be on the throne forever and put everything away, he had to die.
Well, I would like to go back to what Paul said in 1 Corinthians in chapter 2, and in verse, let's start with 6. It says, among the mature we impart wisdom. It's not a wisdom of this age or the rulers of this age who are doomed to pass away, but we impart a secret and hidden wisdom of God, which God decreed before the ages for our glorification. The key is this next sentence: none of the rulers of this age understood this, for if they had, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. So what I'm saying here is he could have answered them, but he didn't, because of the fact that God intended for this to be hidden up until the time of the resurrection and God sending the Spirit upon the apostles so that they would understand.
Which is a little bit of what Mike was implying too. Well, it's just like Jesus to answer this way, isn't it? He never gives you the answer you're expecting. And many times he resorts to metaphor and symbolism to get here. I don't know that I have a better answer, but just a little bit of ramblings on it. Light, first of all, as a metaphor, is very, very significant. And we could talk about that for a long time. Isaiah 9:2, the people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of the shadow of death, a light has dawned. Jesus says, I'm that light. He said, I'm the light of the world. He who follows me will not walk in the darkness, but will have the light of life. And then he says, oh, by the way, you need to be the light too. Let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Our light, of course, is not our own. It's a reflection of his light. We are the moon to his sun. But light has meaning, and they would have understood that. They would understand the symbolism involved in that. He reaffirms his identity by referring to himself as the light, which has remiss implications to it. For a little while, speaks of the present state of things, the temporary nature of his present state. And then the lifting up introduces a different form of eternal life, which I think is, if I understood you all, is consistent with what you were saying. So he answered them. It's just not the answer that they were expecting or the answer that I would have. David, we have or Don, we have a.
I was kind of reading the rest of the story here, but the answer seems to be in verse, 35, says, the one who walks in the darkness does not know where he is going. He's telling him, you don't know. You don't believe in me. And of course, that's the rest of the story where he quotes Isaiah. It's not that he could not answer plainly to them. They wouldn't believe the answer because they didn't know.
That's very true. That's sadly true. Sadly true. His indirect answer uses metaphor and symbolism to deepen the understanding of his role and the necessity of faith in him while he is among them. And in this way, he addresses the crowd's confusion over the nature of Messiah's eternal presence. He is the Messiah forever, but not in the way that they're thinking. Come on around, Jeff. When evening came, they went out of the city. They went back to the home of Lazarus and Mary and Martha. And Monday is over. So we've been there Sunday for the triumphant entry. And now we've had the first day of confrontation, of more to come at the end of Monday. Go ahead, Jeff.
He is the Messiah, and he will be the Messiah forever and ever until we leave this earth.
Amen. Absolutely. Thank you, brother.
Thank you.
All right, so we're coming to Tuesday. And this is all going to be about confrontation with the religious leaders. He's going to be involved in this continual, he's going to have some parables along the way, but primarily he's going to be confronting and being confronted by the religious officials. Looking back a little bit from Monday morning, in the morning as Jesus was returning to Jerusalem, this is Monday morning, he was hungry and he noticed a fig tree beside the road. He went over to see if there were any figs, but there were only leaves. You remember what happened. He cursed the fig tree, right? So Tuesday morning, in the morning, as they went along, they saw the fig tree withered from the roots. Peter remembered and said, "Rabbi, look, the fig tree you cursed has withered and died." Then Matthew adds, when the disciples saw this, they were amazed. "How did the fig tree wither so quickly?" they asked. The fig tree has a great deal of symbolism in Jewish culture. From Jeremiah 8:13, "I will take away their harvest, declares the Lord. There will be no grapes on the vine. There will be no figs on the tree, and their leaves will wither. What I have given them will be taken from them." Everything Jesus does has a reason. And of course, with the fig tree, there is the symbolic lesson, the remiz, if you will, of Israel as a nation who has totally failed in accepting Jesus as Messiah. He's tried for 3 years to produce the fruit of faith in Israel to no avail. And the withered fig tree is a symbol of judgment against Israel. His purpose now in a lot of this, maybe in most, maybe in all, I don't know, is not to convince the Scribes, Pharisees, and Sadducees really of anything. I think that he's washed his hands of them. His purpose is what? His disciples. This is the future. We got to get you ready. We're running out of time. Now's the time. You got to get it. It's got to come home to you. So we pretty much look at all of this confrontation, not to do anything with the religious leaders, but to strengthen his disciples, to instruct his disciples, prepare them for what in a very few days is going to be all in their court. Jesus replied, "Truly I tell you, if you have faith and do not doubt, not only can you do what was done to the fig tree, but also you can say to this mountain, 'Go throw yourself into the sea,' and it will be done. If you believe, you will receive whatever you ask for in prayer."
You know, a lot of times we look at that about saying to this mountain, "Go throw yourself into the sea." We don't really understand the symbolism that Jesus is talking about. And if you think about where he was and looking toward the mount, the Temple Mount, he's saying to his disciples, I don't think they truly understood this at this point, but I think they did in retrospect. He's saying, these people, the scribes, the Pharisees, Sadducees, they're going to oppose you. This mountain, this government of Israel is going to oppose you. But you pray to God, and it's going to be thrown into the sea. In symbolic literature, being thrown into the sea means that a nation is going to go back and not be in existence anymore. He said, "Go throw yourself into the sea and it will be done." A lot of times we think about that we should pray to God and he'll lift up a literal mountain and throw it in the sea. And while God has the power to do that.
Boy, would that create chaos.
Yeah, that's not really what it's talking about. Mountain is always symbolic of a government, and a lot of times of a government that opposes God. If you think about back in Daniel chapter 2, it talks about the image with the head of gold and so forth. And what happened, the stone that was carved or hewn by no hand shattered that and grew into a great mountain encompassing the earth, talking about the fact that God's going to establish his own kingdom. And that's the true symbolism of a mountain there.
Yeah.
So,
And the mountain that he's standing on is the Mount of Olives. The sea that they would know about would be the Mediterranean Sea. So moving mountains. Okay. I hope I'm not standing very close to that when it happens. And I hope you don't want it one place and you want it another place, because that's going to really create a lot of confusion. We'll talk a little bit about genres, and we're about to run out of time, so we're not going to get very far with this. But literary genres include metaphor, simile, imagery, parable, allusion, irony, personification, paradox, and in this case, of course, hyperbole. He's speaking in hyperbole. He talked about another time, Matthew 17, that if you just have enough faith as a grain of mustard seed, well, you can move mountains. That time he was talking about a demon-possessed child, and the demon-possessed child was the mountain. You can move that mountain if you have enough faith. And then he's going to go on, and Paul will go on and remind us in 1 Corinthians 13 that no matter how much faith you got, if you don't have love, it's no good. We're going to come back to this and talk a little bit more about it and see if we have any mountain movers among us. We'll have class next week, and then the week after that, our Israeli guide, Mickey, is going to be here for about a week, and he's going to have my class. And everybody who wants to, I think probably all of the adult classes will be in here 2 weeks from now, and you'll really want to be here for that. He's a great, great guy, and great stories to tell. All right, well, thank you for moving up, and thank you for your participation and patience, and have a wonderful God bless week.